Welcome back to the Doubters, everybody, on Thursday, the 16th of July. And I've got a guest here with me today. I've got Yannick Jacob. Is it Jacob or Jacob?
I got used to Jacob. I was born Jakob because,
Jacob.
German and all.
Okay.
But rarely anybody calls me Jakob. So I adjusted. Anything goes.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you. I should have checked you before we went on air with that. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. So Yannick is joining us today from his home in you're in London?
I'm in East London. Yes, I've been for a little while.
Yeah.
I haven't left for a little while too.
No, funny that. Yeah. So Yannick is joining us today, and a very welcome guest. And just to introduce anybody who's here, maybe tuning in, listening to the recording for the first time, this is the Doubters. This is my private online community. And I treat this really as a learning, explorative space around these conversations, and all aspects related to this concept that I'm developing around the purpose of self-doubt. So sometimes I'm here on my own, and most regularly I'm here with a guest. And as I said, it's an explorative space. So we don't plan our conversations. In fact, Yannick and I have spoken about this topic before, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But what I'm hoping is today that we might get into some new areas around it. It was actually over a year ago that we spoke about this because Yannick made a contribution to my book around the positive aspects of self-doubt, which I was struggling to come to terms with. So I turned to Yannick about that. So let me just say a little bit about you, Yannick. You're an existential coach and a positive psychologist, amongst other hats that I know that you wear. You're a coach, supervisor, and a trainer. I met you through my coaching school, really. You have quite a big part in Animas. You do some training there, and I've just kind of introduced you to. I think you've done quite a few talks on existential coaching and things like that, which I've got quite an interest in. So what do you want people to know about you before we start this conversation?
Yeah, I have many arms, so to speak. I like the word multipotentialite that Emily Wapnick kind of coined for people who have a portfolio career or multi-passionate hummingbirds. I've heard many terms. I think the umbrella term is helping people think, grow, learn. I used to say making people think because I used to be a lot more forceful. I guess I still am, depending which cultural context I'm in.
Okay.
But it's about going that level deeper and thinking and feeling, getting to know yourself, finding answers to some big questions. And I guess questioning is one of those key terms in my work. As a coach mediator, when I work with leaders, when I work with individuals, other coaches, so coaching, supervision, training, all of this is about questioning. When you want to learn, I think you need to doubt yourself and your position that you're currently holding. So that's why I really connected with what you're doing here. But I see it very positively. I know self-doubt can have a very negative association for many people because when it gets to the kind of rumination and questioning your foundations as a kind of like an insecurity almost, it can be a very challenging experience, especially when it's not really warranted. But I think the value of doubting what we think we know, the kind of phenomenological perspective of like bracketing what we think we know and whether what we know is the truth, whether who we are is actually who we are. If we start questioning that in a safe and confidential space, in a space where we can, pull the rug underneath your feet a little bit and, feel a bit wobbly and maybe we're supported by somebody. I think it's a really good practice to do that every now and then. And if we have a safe environment to be able to do that, I think this is where we really grow because we allow ourselves to question some of the fundamental questions. And if you shake the foundation of who you are, of course that can be a bit uncomfortable, sometimes very uncomfortable. But if we go through that process, I think we arrive at a more solid foundation, one that's flexible and yet solid. I imagine this kind of earthquake kind of foundation. Like buildings are built in a way that they can move, but they're still protected against the kind of wobbliness that an earthquake can bring about. But they're solid; they're not going to collapse. So, that's kind of what my work is, to help people question and grow a couple of levels on top of their skyscraper.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Gosh,
I hadn't done that analogy before. That just came out. Thank you for that.
I love that. Yeah, new, as I said, exploratory space, where we can have new stuff come out here. But you dove right straight into the subject then, Yannick. Thank you for that. I just, wanted to say that you've always come across as somebody who's really enthusiastic about your work, and really passionate about your work as well, and that's a really attractive quality. So I saw that in you. And so just to explain a little bit about where I came from this topic, because I think it's quite an interesting and relevant journey, and we have spoken about it a bit before, is that so I came into this topic around asking the question about, does self-doubt have a purpose, because of my own experience with self-doubt, which had been, I say it was my lifelong companion. And I'd got into a real sticky place, actually, emotionally, trying to battle self-doubt, trying to be positive, trying to seek positivity and the positive affirmations and all that kind of stuff. And it didn't work for me. What I found is it was a lot of effort. And I could perhaps overcome self-doubt in one area of my life through positive mental attitude and that kind of energy. And then it would just come back when I do something new. And I'm a person who likes to change and grow. So that meant that I was experiencing a lot of self-doubt. And I got to the time in my life where I experienced my worst case of self-doubt, which my book starts off with. And I didn't have the energy for that. So I just had to go with it. And I got through that experience. And I came out of that. And I just thought, I wonder if self-doubt has a purpose. So when I qualified as a coach, I thought about what I was going to do with this new skill, and this question came back to me, and I just wanted to explore it. But part of the challenge I had around that was the positive thinking. So I got into a place where I was really anti-positivity. And I think when I spoke to you, I said, like, I've got a real bias against this stuff. But what I was finding was that I was getting really triggered by it. I'd going out on social media, and you see it a lot, don't you? It's like, just looking at the bright side of life and whatever, and, just talking about toxic negativity and all the narratives and the rhetoric that's out there. I was really struggling with, and I was just getting this, I was getting triggered by it, actually. Mm-hmm. And, but I wanted to explore this question. And so I just went into it with the purpose of doing that. But what I realized actually was that I needed to understand a little bit really what positive psychology was, what the aim of positive psychology was. And so that I came to you and we had this conversation, and you helped me to really understand a different aspect of it, which I'll probably go into a little bit more maybe in a bit, but I just want to sort of maybe put that back to you. What is the aim of positive psychology if it's not about being positive all the time?
Yeah. First of all, I resonate with that over amplification of positivity. I went through my master's in applied positive psychology, and coming out, I went to, I can't say the opposite end of the spectrum, but I kind of turned my attention to the kind of traditionally more seen as dark side, the existential, the void, the big questions, the anxiety, the meaninglessness, because having spent 2 years with positive psychologists, to my extent, to my taste, a lot of them were too positive. There wasn't really that kind of acknowledgement that life is really tough and challenging, and that we're going to meet all of those dilemmas and paradoxes that the human condition brings with it. Being in the world, alive with other people, we can't help but compare ourselves. We can't help but have conflicting wants and needs. So I knew, and I think everybody knows, that it's not just about being positive. It's if we strive for that, then we set ourselves up to fail. And at the same time, I saw not necessarily the solid researchers, because if you ask a positive psychologist, or most popular positive psychologist that I respect, they would say, look, obviously, psychology as usual, negative psychology, if you wanted to call it that, matters. Positive psychology was never established as a branch of science or scientific research. It was never there to be on its own, to be the only thing that matters. It was always meant to complete psychology. So to define it, it's a field of study that looks at what's right with people. We use empirical research, we use observations and qualitative analysis and quantitative studies to figure out what's right with people. What are people's resources? You might say we look at what's happening for people 0 to +10, rather than, where's the problem and how can we fix it? How can we bring things back to 0? So that's useful, because it hasn't not been adequately researched. What are positive emotions good for? What about hope and optimism and love? We haven't really researched a lot of these topics before 21 years ago now, when positive psychology was kind of announced as something that is worth considering and studying. So since 1999, when Martin Seligman announced that, there was a lot more research into mindfulness, into flow and engagement, into post-traumatic growth, rather than post-traumatic stress, all the kind of more positive side of the spectrum that isn't necessarily a problem in the first place. So research money isn't usually spent on it, but something that is important to a life well lived. We look at what people want out of life. Most of them will tell you some form of happiness, whether that's good relationships or, positive emotions, whether that's a sense of meaning and purpose, some sort of positive experience. So this is why it's really useful to look at what is a good life actually made of, and look at it from a scientific perspective, because that allows us to influence policy. That allows us to influence politics. It allows us to influence organizations. 20 years ago, like when I studied 2008, people got laughed out of the room in organizations with their positive psychology. And it's still not a particularly popular term to be used because the positive and the psychology is what many people don't really gel with. But we can say, look, here's the research that, if you have more optimistic sales team, then they're going to make more sales. If they have optimistic explanatory style towards negative events that are happening in their lives, such as not making a sale or getting turned down, being rejected on something, not just in organizations, but generally, this is really valuable stuff. And we can now present, when people like to talk about proof, but it's difficult to have kind of proof in social sciences. Yeah. But we can say we have strong evidence here that if you have a happy workforce, you're probably going to make more money, because they take less sick leave and, they create a better work culture. They go the extra mile. If you have more purpose and meaning, the whole millennial debate really brought out the importance of meaning and purpose in the workforce. But in general in life, that's something that people care about and that hasn't really been studied. So that's why positive psychology is really useful to have on the map, not in itself, but to complete psychology as usual.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. And so I guess what I'm hearing you saying was that whereas psychology was traditionally looking at what was wrong with people, and obviously that's where the research money was put, they decided to start looking at what's right with people and more focus in that area.
Yeah, and as the first wave of research had emerged, in the first couple of years following the millennial, the 2000s, so much research came out that clearly said it's so much better to be happy because you're gonna, earn more money, you're gonna make more sales, you're gonna have more sex, you're gonna have better relationships, you're gonna stay married longer, and like all of these statistics came out, which is real empirical data, but it led to this kind of craze that everybody must be happy.
This is what you read my mind. This is the question I was going to ask you: is what happened there then? Because I'm talking about my experience of that expectation, the pressure that I felt from that expectation to be positive and happy, and how that that really turned me off. And then you talking about how you experienced that in studying positive psychology. So Why is it? What happens there then?
Well, what happened is researchers looked at their data and then said there's a correlation between A and B in many cases, happiness or some other positive psychology construct, and B, which is something that is desirable in people's lives, such as, happy relationships, sex, or sales or money. And then some that got into the media, and through this kind of game of picking up a correlation turns into, oh, everybody must be happy because obviously it's so good for you.
Just be happy then.
Yeah, and researchers don't usually talk like that. Researchers point out some of the links and say we should probably study this a bit more.
Yeah.
But the headlines tend to say, if you are happy, you're gonna be much richer. Yeah. And then the message is easy to be picked up as, I should really be happier. And there's all of these interventions now that I can do to be happier. And often it gets to be sound like if somebody's a bit too passionate and too enthusiastic about this kind of thing, it sounds like here's a simple intervention that can make you happy. Yeah. So if you read that as a general headline, but your individual context is one of perhaps, coming from a family history of clinical depression, then it's really difficult to actually just do that, because life is not that simple. Life is very complex, and people are very complex, and minds are very complex. And, people come in with past traumas, and people come in with past experiences, and people come in with a complex environments and societal structures. So sometimes it is as simple as developing a gratitude habit. I've seen people's lives turn around by just getting into mindfulness or some other form of meditation. I've seen people's lives transform incredibly just by eating more healthy diet, exercising regularly, getting into some form of meditation, and sleeping, 7, 8, 9 hours, depending on what your body needs. Yeah. So it can be quite simple, but often it's not. Yeah. So, and it's those simple examples that the media or, personal development gurus often pick up and say, look at this person and look at me, it was very simple. Like I've just done these 8 steps,
Buy my book, come to my conference.
Only £6,000. What's your happiness worth to you?
Exactly.
So, positive affirmations, The Secret, the kind of positive thinking craze. Yeah. If you just want it enough, then you're going to get it. And while there's always something in there that has some scientific grounds, if you do focus more on positive things, and if you do develop positive self-talk, it can really transform people. But it is more complex depending on what the person brings to the table. So we got to be a bit careful. And it's easy to put that message out there, that it's easy to be happy, and you just need to pay me a bunch of money, and then, I'll give you the secret.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in some ways it is very simple. And of course, I've experienced a lot of benefit myself from developing simple habits. And habit is, another thing about how complex a new habit is to create. But, that I've had massive improvements on my life. And like you say, but I guess essentially that this positive message sells. It's marketable, isn't it? And you're talking about using in organizations and individuals, marketing themselves on, look what I've done and you can do it too, very, very simply. And it seems to me that there seemed to be quite a shift. I don't know if you would say this, if this is as accurate or it's just something that I say, that there seems to be quite a shift in society in thinking. I guess it's probably, a lot around social media. And the expectation for people to be positive and be happy all the time,
I think social media really added a huge element into this, because all of a sudden people portray, or most people portray, their best sides. Yeah. It's like everything, most people, what they put out on social media, is a polished version of themselves. In some cases, a completely different version of themselves. Some people develop this kind of ability to be quite vulnerable and show up very real, and do share some of the self-doubt that they have and some of the difficult times. And it seems to land really well with people. It seems that when people are authentic and they do share what they're struggling with, when they're having a bad day, and they're being quite real about it, I appreciate that. But a lot of people would just not do that. So there's definitely a welcoming trend to be more real on social media because it is welcomed by other people. But certainly the majority of people do show up in a polished version. You post a picture that makes you look good, and I think everybody does to some extent.
Yeah, of course. I'm never going to put a picture up that I don't think looks good. But it's worth remembering that, isn't it? It could be many iterations. But I guess, I think, maybe more recently there's been another shift. Maybe you can tell me what you think of this, but away from the positive mental attitude, let's manifest like a magical experience, wonderful experience of life for ourselves, and that kind of pressure too. Much more people are kind of really thinking about, well, what is it to have meaning? What is it to have a purposeful life? And that seems to be much more along the lines of what the conversation is around positivity now. But that could create a pressure as well about people like, well, I must find meaning and I must find purpose. And how do I find that?
Yeah, I must find my why. And why haven't I done this yet? Because, there's all of these coaches and these processes and, these 10 steps to finding your why and ikigai and figuring out what the purpose of my life is. And the thing is that it's just there is no one thing. Many people will try to tell you what that one thing is, and it's easy to kind of follow that and then just accept somebody else's meaning for your life. But I think ultimately if you do question, if you do allow yourself to question, or at certain, what we call in existentialist terms, boundary situations, when we're being faced with, maybe for the last 30 years of my life, I've accepted somebody else's sense of purpose, and maybe my sense of purpose is something different. So these are the moments that can really shake our foundations. And on social media and in the media in general, but these are all messages. Messages can come from parents or from friends or from our workplace. The books we read, anything that we consume and we get exposed to can give us these messages about what's a good life, what's a meaningful life, what's a purposeful life, what's the right way to live. And just that there cannot be one answer.
No.
I mean, maybe there can be one answer. I don't know. I just don't believe in it. I think
like
people,
you say, you wear many hats yourself, and the multi-potential. Yeah.
Well, maybe there is one God, and maybe there is a plan for everybody's life, and maybe everybody has this one purpose that they were born to fulfill. I can't exclude the possibility. Personally, I don't believe in it. But I need to respect if somebody believes that, and then they work hard, or they just wait around for that purpose to reveal itself to them. As an existentialist, I would encourage people to go and create that sense of purpose and meaning, and look what's important to them. What are their core values? What motivates them? What moves them? What makes you feel emotional? Every time you get sad or angry or frustrated or elated or happy or, joyful, there's some pointer, there's something that points you towards
good
what's
information
there.
Good information there. Yeah.
So if you allow yourself to kind of tune into that, you start to get in touch with what's important. And once you get in touch with what's important, you can derive a sense of meaning and purpose from that. And then you forge your path.
Yeah, and this is why I love working around this question of self-doubt, because it kind of allows us to explore that space in a very, very personal way. So, just to say, after our conversation around self-doubt, because one of the challenges I was having is about, I wanted to see self-doubt as a positive thing. But then I was struggling around this whole kind of like, if it's positive or negative. I didn't want this kind of binary, or it has to be positive or negative. But then I had to understand that I had to kind of look at embracing the positivity of self-doubt in order to get this message out there, really, in order to help people connect with it. And that's worked really well. So what I do is the first thing I do when people come into the self-doubt coaching is, well, where does self-doubt show up in your life? And we explore that as a positive indicator. So we look at, well, like how self-doubt is a reflection of something that they want, really, because if they're doubting something, it's because they want to do something. And usually that thing is quite important. Otherwise, it would not be overwhelmed by self-doubt, So we look at the fact that you're overwhelmed by self-doubt is a positive thing because it's showing something that is important to you. So then we explore that zone, if you like. So, and that always works really well around the self-doubt coaching. It always works really well when people reframe the experience of self-doubt as a positive thing. And then it can lead very much into those questions around challenging our own truths. So acknowledging those kind of maybe difficult truths that I say truths, not in the kind of the global sense, this is a truth, but something that we're believing is true that probably needs to be challenged because we're telling ourselves that we're incompetent, we're not good enough, or we're lazy, or something like that. But actually, that at some level we're believing that, so it's allowing us to really challenge that. And then, other things I sort of really look for is that real connection with values that often really comes out. And when that comes out, it comes out in a really meaningful way, and then we'll often touch on something that when people who are experiencing self-doubt, they'll touch on something that they absolutely believe, which is really true and really meaningful for them. And that's where I kind of really connect with maybe there's some information there about, your purpose in life, if you like. But, if that really feels true for you and you believe at that level and it fires you up, that I really feel that that's really good information and something to be harnessed, if you like. So in that kind of landscape of doubt, self-doubt, and what is and what isn't, that often comes through, and I feel that's really I love to see that.
What's the opposite of self-doubt for you?
So the opposite of self-doubt, well, it's interesting. I would probably say trust, self-trust. Yeah.
It was interesting to think about it because when self-doubt is seen as something that is not good, then trust or confidence or something like that would be the natural kind of end of like other pole of the spectrum. But when you see it as something positive, which I very much get the flavor of, like this is something very valuable, then there's got to be a dark side on trust as well.
Well, I think there's an expectation sometimes that comes with trust, and I think trust is something that is I think it's all about our relationship with ourselves, actually. So to doubt is just a question, really. We're questioning. That's what doubt is. It's a hesitation. It's a moment of questioning. So then when we trust, it's like something we don't have to question.
Yeah, but if we trust blindly, I guess, that's not a good thing either.
Yeah, exactly.
Necessarily, depending on who and what we trust. But if we never question, I guess we all have met people who just, are not questioning their position at all, and can be so frustrating. It can also be really powerful and really attractive, because, we all know some leaders who seem to never question themselves, or at least don't show that. And it's a very attractive thing if somebody has this absolute certainty. Personally, I think it's a more attractive thing if somebody has confidence, but appreciates that they might be wrong about this. A lot of people don't want to hear that. A lot of people want to hear that follow me. I know exactly where we're going.
Well, I think so. This is an interesting thing about confidence and self-doubt, because I think actually the dictionary definition is a very lazy definition around self-doubt. I've had to redefine it for the book, but they say it's a lack of confidence. And I'm like, no, I don't think it is. I think confidence and self-doubt work really well together, actually. So having self-doubt with confidence, you can have the two together. Go on.
Yeah, no, I just find it really interesting what the public perception of that is, because I wish, and that's why I appreciate your work, I wish we would all value doubt and questioning a lot more. But like, if you ask the general population, would you rather have a leader who says they know exactly where they're going, or would you rather have a leader who says, I'm confident that this is the best way possible forward at this time, but it might not work out? I guess
which is more true, because exactly, that's the thing, isn't it? It's like, it's so alluring, and it's like it's almost like the easy sort of lazy position for human beings to say, okay, we've got our leaders in charge and we've got confidence and they can just go off and do what they need to do. And actually our world doesn't work like that anymore. And I think, what we've been shown over the last few years is that people are much more engaged and much more willing to question people. And, I feel, and what I see a lot more is that people have more trust in someone who will stand up and say, or show that level of doubt, but have doubt with their confidence and say, well, we're not entirely sure, because nobody really knows, do we? I mean, there's this whole thing about uncertainty, and how uncomfortable that is for us. And so a lot of this work around self-doubt is learning to just be more comfortable with uncertainty and recognize that as more of an opportunity and like more of a magical space, really.
Yeah, but I think this is where this positivity overdone comes in as well, because when people blindly trust the positivity and they don't question and they don't doubt, they don't allow that space where they consider difficulty and discomfort, to be something valuable. Then I think you get trapped in this "I must always be positive" thing, and it's not sustainable. It cannot be sustainable. So when people really adopt that kind of perspective, and that's taken too far, and they have this expectation that life can always be really good, and that they can just make negative feelings go away, it's not sustainable, and they will crash into, some people sustain it for interestingly long time, but I don't know anybody who can sustain that without becoming a delusional person that people find it difficult to connect with.
Yeah, well, it's denial, essentially, isn't it? Denial of
and then we start living in our bubbles, and I think we see that politically on a wider scale. Many people like to live in their bubbles, and this is very much about doubting and questioning. We don't like to question ourselves, hence we live in our bubbles and we block people who disagree with us, and we read newspapers that confirm what we already believe, and we talk to people who are likely to agree with us. So then we're not being questioned. It's like self-doubt is not necessarily something that we do. It's also something that other people do. And how many people shut other people out of their lives? It's like, if you disagree with me, then I don't delete me from your friends list, and I've had very difficult conversations with people I've known from a while ago, or people I've known from now, people I consider friends who come out with very concerning political views or very dubious evidence for not wearing masks, for example, during a pandemic. So I do challenge by nature. I do like questioning, and I do like the kind of debate. And I can come in quite strong, but I do feel it's important to doubt other people when they come up with something that's potentially dangerous, not just for them, but also for others. And how many people have, ended their friendships with me because, they didn't want to be questioned. And some of them are better friends than before because we've really allowed that dialogue to happen. And we might not have changed our minds, but we've certainly elevated something and got a better perspective for what's going on for other people, and learned something about our psychology and human psychology. So it's important, I think, to question and to doubt not just ourselves, but also help others to question and doubt themselves. But it takes some courage to be open to that.
It does take courage, and that's one of the things I point out when reframing self-doubt as this positive experience. So my dog's jumping off at me here. Is that, it takes courage to go there. And actually that's an interesting example that you gave there in terms of questioning your friends and people who've come out with views, in that, if somebody shut you down and they're not willing to be questioned and not willing to engage in that process, then that's pretty much end of relationship, really, because where do you go from there?
Not necessarily. I think for example, there's someone I'm thinking about specifically. We just decided not to talk about that anymore.
Okay.
Because we can talk about anything else. We just don't talk about politics.
Okay.
We're good friends.
Okay, no, that's fine. So I guess what I'm saying is that there's no growth in that area then, potentially, on that particular topic. But if you have a friendship and they're willing to be questioned, and they're willing to engage in a debate with you about this stuff, and say, well, no, this is what I think, and you say, well, this is what I think, but you can grow in that. And so then if you turn it in on yourself, and if you don't want to doubt yourself, if you just want to close the door to self-doubt, then potentially you're closing the door to growth. Or actually, if you're really willing to go there and explore this, where do I doubt myself? And that's really an opportunity to grow and learn.
Yeah, and I think what many people do is they engage in that kind of conversation, but they're the doubter of the other person, and they're not really willing to doubt their own opinions as well. And I've certainly been guilty of that at some points, where I'm like, oh, I figured it out, and you're talking nonsense. So I'm going to be challenging your views with the expectations that you see what I see, and you learn what the truth is. And I'm like, I also need to check myself, that I'm coming to this conversation with the possibility of me being the one who's wrong about this.
Yeah, and so you were certain. So when you get to a place of certainty, that's the thing, isn't it?
And I mean, I'm the kind of character as well. If I've researched something fairly extensively, and I've questioned myself, and I've doubted myself, and I've talked to a lot of people, and I've developed a position, then I can argue that position fiercely because I come to that conclusion. So I have to remind myself that to stay open to what is your evidence? How did you come to that conclusion? Is this in itself a coherent point of view based on the evidence that you've seen? Maybe there's evidence that I haven't seen. Maybe there is a whole base of evidence that I don't have access to, or I haven't bothered to look at. So I think it's important that when we doubt somebody else, when we help somebody else question, we come from that kind of phenomenological perspective of bracketing, at least for a moment, at least for a few minutes or half an hour, bracket what we think we know, and really tune into what somebody else thinks.
So it's going in there with an element of openness, rather than, because I think certainty, what was coming up for me is that certainty can slip over into righteousness.
Correct, yeah.
And then I know what I'm talking about. I've looked into this, so then, so therefore I know. And, and then there's, that's kind of closing down the conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, at the same time, I think at some point we need to draw a line, because otherwise we can never be confident about anything. I think it's important that at some point you've looked into something and you've made your conclusion. I mean, how, you can tell the same thing to somebody who's written a PhD about the topic. There's always more evidence.
There's always more. There's always more growth. There's always more room for growth, and always more. But then sometimes you just got to get on with it, haven't you? And
I think sometimes we need to draw a line and say, I've looked into enough stuff to have a pretty solid conclusion on this. And if I can already, after 2 minutes of you talking to me, see that your argument isn't coherent, and that you're citing evidence of institutions that, have been debunked or proven to have a large bias or financial involvement in the point that they're arguing, at some point I can be reasonably confident that, I think I'm going to hold on to my position, and maybe I don't need to read all of these papers from, that foundation that I know to be fraudulent.
Yeah. So you don't need to waste your time on that, basically.
That's the question, right? Am I wasting my time? At some point, more doubting might just be wasting my time.
Yeah, because it does take time. It does take time. Yeah. I'm going to open up now if anybody wants to come in and make a contribution or ask a question. What have we missed? Have we missed any important points here that you'd like to raise? You don't have to come on. We will leave some time after the recording's finished as well. But if you want to come on, you can just unmute yourself and turn your camera on if you want to as well. And feel free. We'll carry on chatting. We've got a few people here live. Carol has said she's written in the group chat the self part.
Could you elaborate a bit, Carol?
Hi, Carol.
Hey, good to see you.
Hi, I'm a bit confused because when you're talking about doubt and self, I don't know how to express myself, because you're talking about opinions and things like that, but self-doubt for me is more about me as a human being, and you're talking about purpose and things like that. So a bit more existential questions rather than.
So you're talking about doubting your whole sense of self, your identity. rather than an
Yeah, well,
opinion or a view.
yeah, exactly. Because I think that's, I can understand that part, but more like, around the purpose type of thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think when you take it to that level, it gets a whole lot more profound. It gets a whole lot more existential. And if we talk about self-doubt, not as in I am not quite sure if that decision I'm about to make is the right decision, or whether that job or that relationship I'm about to enter is the right decision. When we talk about I'm not I'm not sure if I am who I am. I always considered myself this funny person, or this fair person, or this person who's respected by the people around me, and all of a sudden I get to a situation where I'm like, I don't think people respect me. And I've always considered myself a respectable person. I've always lived my life to do the right thing, and all of a sudden I'm getting all of this criticism for the decisions I'm making, and people tell me that I'm wrong, and that I'm causing harm to people, and all of a sudden you have self-doubt on a whole nother level. And I think that's a different conversation.
It is, and what I find with the coaching is that sometimes that the doubt on that kind of surface level, am I making the right decision? Is this the right career path for me? Whatever, can lead into those bigger questions around self-doubt. And so the way I see it is that it's all positive questioning. It can all lead somewhere, to lead to growth, and and if it's there, let's address it. Let's bring it to the forefront. Let's bring those questions in and work with them, and see where they go. And the coaching is about building a container for that, so that they're not polluting every single part of your life, and and stopping you moving forward, because that's what existential doubt can do, if you like. It can be very crippling. So it's
and how many people do not allow themselves to have those conversations, to open that door? Because if the door is a little bit open, and what's coming out is like, oh, that is something I do not enjoy. Many
I haven't
people
got time
just
for this.
they put their foot down.
Exactly.
They try to put the lock on, or they try to push it back down, and it's like, once it's a little bit open, chances are it's going to open more. And the more you try to suppress it and keep that door locked and put another couple of locks on, some other way it's going to open. And the longer you wait to have that conversation, the more difficult it's going to be, and the more life-changing it might be. The more if you suppress it for too long, if you have those kind of conversations immediately, then you can do that in a coaching setting, or you can do that talking to a friend, or writing it down in your journal. You can allow yourself to look at those things when they start emerging, ever so slightly. When like little windows open and you feel a bit of air, it's not necessarily, it's a little chilly, rather than the door blasts open and a bunch of monsters come out. If you feel that little wind through that window, you can actually turn your attention to it and have that conversation. But if you keep pushing the door back and try to push it out of your awareness, at some point you'll find yourself with a psychoanalyst or a psychotherapist, and really kind of digging quite deep where those kind of questions begin, and at what point in my life did I choose the wrong path.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Carol?
Yes. What I'd like to add is, like, I don't know if there's space for that, like sharing a bit of my story.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, please.
I did some strengths tests or something with some friends, and we had to rate each other. So it's quite an open thing to do, because it can be uncomfortable, because how they rate you could be completely not reasoning. Anyway, one of my strengths is kindness, and none of my friends thought I was that kind. So my rating was like 5 out of 10. So in the past, I would have cried but actually, as Yannick was saying, it is an uncomfortable space, but it made me realize that people might see you differently, what it is that they didn't see this as my strength, where for me is so important. So it is uncomfortable to have this, let people tell you stuff that could be uncomfortable, but actually there's growth there, because I'm like, oh, so what is this? And then one of my friends was something she held from the past. That one event meant that that's how she saw me because of that one event. So she held on to that memory. So it's fascinating if you allow these conversations.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. I think that's the point. It's about being open to that growth and the discomfort that it brings, because it's very easy, if I feel criticized, I automatically go into defensiveness. But these days I recognize I'm doing that, so I can grow through my defensiveness or give myself a little bit of time with my defensiveness and make up the next morning and think, okay, maybe let me take another look at this, but learning not to close the door on it, I think.
And I think that's very important point here, because I have the same thing, when somebody tells me that I'm wrong and what I'm telling them is bullshit and harmful to people, I also get defensive. I think it's pretty normal thing to kind of have that kind of reaction. It's like, no, but I'm right, but I'm, but I learned this, or I studied this, or I know this. It's like to allow yourself in that moment, first of all, to recognize that this is your reaction and this is how you want to respond. And then, sometimes we respond that way, and then we notice. Ideally, we would notice, and then we choose how we respond. But, any kind of argument on anything that I have, I usually kind of go into my cave at some point and actually allow myself to look at, was that actually the case? Or was I too certain? Was that actually pretty accurate? Like, might my thinking be wrong in some way? Have I overlooked something? And that's why I really appreciate people who kind of stand their ground on their argument, and people who come in and kind of show me how they arrived at their conclusion. That's how we can learn. If somebody just says something and like, I can't look into how they've arrived at, it's like, no, I just know that, then it's difficult for me to question myself on my position. But that's why I like to open the debate and actually then listen to the other person. Notice that I'm being defensive right now, and perhaps that wasn't appropriate. Apologize if you need to, not perhaps for your position, but for the way that you reacted when somebody questioned you and you got defensive. So I think that's normal, and I think it's important that people realize that it's fine to get defensive, but then try to recognize it and choose how you want to respond and from what position.
And from my perspective, I feel that this is a really important quality to be able to develop now more than ever, for all of us, if we can, this ability to self-reflect, question, and grow with that. Great. Okay. Well, we're coming up to time now, Yannick. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. There's just, I'll be listening. I always listen back to the videos in depth, and there's so much coming out. I know there's going to be so many insights coming out of this when I listen back again. So thank you for that. And so just to close off, is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Embrace your human condition. Life is tough, but you can learn to embrace the discomfort. And I think a lot of that is what self-doubt and questioning yourself and allowing that is about, to embrace the inevitable discomfort that comes with living, and try to live life in a way that you have your eyes open, even when, it might be difficult to see what you see. I'd like if people were a bit more courageous in questioning themselves and other people, and a bit more open to changing their perspective potentially, and look at the process behind. But do that with confidence.
Wonderful. That's a fantastic soundbite. Brilliant, Yannick. So just to finish off, what are you available for? Where can people find you?
They can find me on online. Existential.coach is my website. Or if you're a coach, I'm just revamping rocketsupervision.com. So that's the main avenues where you can find me. You can find me on Facebook and on LinkedIn and on YouTube. If you just look for my name, you'll find stuff.
Brilliant. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Yannick. I'll make sure I put all those links into the email that goes out tomorrow. Okay, so just stick around after we turn off the recording if you want to carry on having a chat here with Yannick for another few minutes. Just to say thank you for everybody who's joined us here today. Thank you to everybody who's watched the recording. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. And next week, I have got leadership coach Caroline Gask coming on, and we're going to be talking about breaking the rules, which when we're talking about that is about breaking the rules, questioning and breaking the rules of society, and how we go about that. Caroline is living quite an extraordinary life, so she's a really great example of someone who's got the benefits of doing this. She's going to be bringing a great conversation. Just to say, I'm going to have to break my own rules of the time I'm going out next week because she's in New Zealand, so I'm actually going out at 10 a.m. next Thursday. So it'd be great if anybody's able to come and join us for that. So thank you once again for joining us, and I'll see you next week.